Okay. Here.
A lot. I respect Destiny a lot. Destiny's changed my opinions about a number of things like January 6th. What is Kick? Kick is effectively a loss leader for stake. And I think that Elon Musk is using Twitter as a loss leader for Tesla and SpaceX by losing money on it to make more money by entrenching himself in the government. It exists in an ecosystem. And
that's called rent-seeking, and it's bad. It's considered a bad thing. It's considered a bad thing in a liberal capitalist society when you're spending money not on research and development, on creating a better product, not on advertising insofar as trying to get your product in front of more people, but in spending money to alter the regulatory environment to give you a competitive edge. That's called rent-seeking behavior, and it's generally either illegal or highly discouraged because you don't want people spending money on shit just to have a more competitive product, or I'm sorry, to make their product seem more competitive by buying the government. By definition, you want to avoid that. Rent-seeking is bad behavior.
System. And I think that he knew that, and I think that's what happened. I see what he's saying.
Let's isn't there an Investopedia article on this? Rent seeking. There's a Wikipedia article. Okay. Corporate Finance Institute. What is rent seeking in economics, and what are some examples? Let's just read. Why not? Okay. Rent-seeking is defined as any practice in which an entity aims to increase its wealth without making any contributions to the wealth or benefit of society. It's typically done by manipulating the political environment and can result in social harm. A common example of rent-seeking is the act of lobbying for government-funded subsidies. Key takeaways. I don't even agree that I think that this is actually a really shit example given here. Lobbying can be forms of rent-seeking. Lobbying isn't necessarily a form of rent-seeking. This is a common example given, but I mean like, a guy that manufactures solar panels or windmills or whatever that wants to advertise it to people or get in front of a politician and say like, hey, I think that your constituents could benefit from blah, blah, blah. I don't necessarily know if you would consider that rent seeking. Well, actually, no, hold on, because you're still trying to influence politicians. I'll be 50-50 on that. I'm not actually sure. One second. Key takeaways. Rent-seeking is an economic concept that occurs when an entity seeks to gain wealth without making any contributions to the benefit of society. Rent in rent-seeking is based on the economic definition of the term, which is defined as an economic wealth obtained through shrewd or potentially manipulative use of resources. An example of rent-seeking is when a company lobbies the government for grants, subsidies, or tariff protection. Rent-seeking comes in many forms, from lobbying or donating funds. For example, if you donate money but write it off on your taxes, it could be considered a form of rent-seeking. How does rent-seeking work? The concept of rent-seeking was established in 1967 by Gordon Tullock and popularized by Ann Kruger in 1974. It evolved from the studies of Adam Smith, who is often regarded as the father of economics. The concept is based on an economic definition of rent, defined as economic wealth obtained through shrewd or potentially manipulative use of resources. Smith's studies suggested that entities earn income from wages, profit, and rent. To create profit usually requires the risk of capital with the goal of gaining a return. Earning wages comes from employment. However, rent is the easiest to obtain of the three income sources and can require little risk. Economic rent is the income earned from the utilization of resource ownership. Entities that own resources can lend them to earn interest rent, lease them to earn rental income, or utilize them in other income-producing ways. In general, the term economic rent has evolved to mean receiving a payment that exceeds the cost involved in the associated resource. Entities, therefore, will take rent-seeking steps to obtain economic rent that requires no reciprocal contribution of production. One example of rent seeking is when companies hire lobbyists to encourage the government to change regulations to make it easier for them to earn profits rather than try to spend time and money on improving their goods in the marketplace. I guess if you strictly consider this, if all lobbying is considered rent seeking, then I guess arguably not all rent seeking behavior would necessarily be bad then, I guess. I feel like I haven't usually heard of this term, but I guess in that case it could be. Because we can imagine forms of lobbying that can be good, and we can imagine forms of lobbying that can be bad. But I'm trying to think, imagine the government had a regulation that said that every single shirt sold is going to cost $10, and then you lobby the government to take away that tax. Would you consider that rent-seeking? Like if you're lobbying the government to reduce like a tariff or a tax, would that be considered rent-seeking behavior? I'm My understanding is typically no, but maybe it would be. Let's see what actually goes. Rent-seeking factors and examples. Rent-seeking is a byproduct of political legislation and government funding. Politicians decide the laws, regulations, and funding allocations that govern industries and government subsidy distributions. These legislations and actions manifest rent-seeking behaviors by offering economic rent with little or no reciprocity. Business rent seekers. Business social service programs are typically designed to provide aid for businesses with the goal of fostering economic prosperity. For example, businesses such as banks can lobby the government for help in the areas of competition, special subsidies, grants, and tariff protection. If a business succeeds in getting laws passed to limit their competition, bail them out of economic hardship, or create barriers to entry for others, it can achieve economic rents without any added productivity or capital at risk. Are we spamming? Join what? Discord? Oh. Licensing requirements. Lobbying for the lessening of occupational licensing requirements is another very specific example of rent seeking. Doctors, dentists, airline pilots, and many other fields require licensing to practice. However, many U.S. states, this licensing process is expensive and time consuming. Often regulations exist due to past lobbying efforts from existing industry members. If certification and license obligations prevent newcomers from competing, fewer professionals may share the revenue. Thus, a more significant portion of money accrues to each existing member without additional economic benefit. Also, since limits to competition can be a driver for prices, consumers may be required to pay more. Issues arising from rent seeking. How much longer is this? Okay, we finished this. Rent seeking can disrupt market efficiencies and create pricing disadvantages for market participants. It has been known to cause limited competition and high barriers to entry. Those that benefit from successful rent seeking obtain additional or added economic rents without any added obligation. That can potentially create unfair advantages, specifically providing wealth to certain businesses that lead to greater market share at the detriment of competitors. Lastly, rent seeking wealth is typically a function of taxpayer funding. These tax revenues are used to provide economic wealth for rent seekers, but may or may not improve the economic climate or produce any benefits for taxpayers at large. This can lead to disparaging funds that lack regeneration and require higher taxes in the future. Is rent seeking illegal? In general, competition for rent is legal, regardless of any harm it may do to an economy. However, various rent seeking behaviors are illegal, such as the forming of cartels or the bribing of politicians. Why is rent seeking bad for the economy? Rent seeking can make markets less efficient by creating price disadvantages. Rent seeking behaviors can also create artificial bars to entry for new companies, stifling innovation. Are landlords rent seekers? Not generally. The use of the word rent can create some confusion here. The term rent in rent seeking is based on the economic definition of rent, which is defined as economic wealth obtained through shrewd or potentially manipulative use of resources. That said, it's possible for landlords to engage in rent seeking behavior. Well, I'm curious if they're going to go by the broad definition that like all lobbying, for instance, is rent seeking. I wonder why a landlord would not be considered a rent seeker. If they have property and they loan it to somebody else, basically, I guess they're deploying some capital for a risk to do it. Rent seeking is an economic concept that occurs when an entity seeks to gain wealth without making any reciprocal contribution of wealth to society. An example of rent seeking is when a company lobbies the government for grants, subsidies, or tariff protection. Rent seeking comes in many forms, from lobbying to donate or donating funds. For example, if you donate money but write it off on your taxes, it could be considered a form of rent seeking. Rent seeking interferes with the efficient operation of the free market, and it imposes unfair price barriers on individuals and companies. Damn, whoever wrote this, I just super disagree. So like, if you're spending money and basically the goal is like, let's say that I have a company, like I can envision two forms of behavior. I don't know if both would be considered rent seeking. Let's say that I make a car and I go to like a local mayor or like a state and I say, hey, you should make it so that only my cars can be sold in the state. And they're like, well, why is that? And you're like, well, because my cars have a special Nebraska sticker on them. Wouldn't that be cool? And then the mayor or the governor is like, okay, base, let's do that. And then they ban all the other cars. That's like a form of rent seeking. I can raise the price of my cars. I can do all sorts of shit. I've gained like a huge market advantage because I basically spent money or lobbied it in some way, and I'm not really doing anything to make my cars better. But like, let's say, for instance, let's say that it cost more money to ship lithium-ion batteries into the state because there was like a tariff on lithium-ion batteries. And I go to a mayor or a governor. I'm like, hey, there's a tax that makes it so we can't import lithium-ion batteries, and it's making all of our electric vehicles not competitive. Like, can we do something to like either forgive this tax just for electric vehicles or like get rid of this tax? And the person's like, okay, yeah, sure. You'd be creating technically a better environment, a better economic environment. You'd be reducing one of the barriers to entry. You'd be making a more competitive market. Like, would they consider that a form of rent seeking here? I feel like typically that wouldn't be considered rent seeking. Like, I feel like the rent-seeking behavior would be the other companies that have already basically enjoyed the lack of competition that's fostered by the banning of the imports, basically. But yeah, I'm not sure. This article might have a laissez-faire bias. It could, but Investopedia is typically pretty good. But regardless of whether or not, regardless of whether or not you consider all behavior rent-seeking or not, that's lobbying. If we are, if it's either way, well, the Twitter stuff is obviously rent-seeking, and that Elon Musk spent a whole bunch of money to gain an advantage in a way that doesn't help our economy. Whether or not you consider all lobbying rent-seeking or not, you can say that maybe all of it's rent-seeking and some of it's good, some of it's bad. The Twitter stuff would obviously be bad, right? Society's not being benefited or made better in any way by Elon Musk deploying Twitter for propaganda purposes. If Elon Musk has things that he can sell to the government, or things that he can produce for society, he should be able to do that in our environment. He shouldn't need to own the government to do that, right? None of these would all be examples of bad forms of rent-seeking. If we're to say some rent-seeking is good and some is bad, these would all be forms of bad rent-seeking, yeah. Will you chat with Asmongold? I don't think Asmongold will ever chat. I don't think he wants to talk to me. We've like been in each other's like orbits for like a year or more, and he has never. So I don't think it's happening. But if he was shilling for Harris, it'd be the opposite point being made, I'm sure. What is it like for you to invent like problems in your head and then get upset at them? What does that feel like? So like when you're sitting around and then you like think of like, I bet if this thing happened that wasn't happening, I bet you, and then you get mad about it. What does that feel like? What a horrible existence.